All right, so Turdz has won his quarterfinals, as this position here shows, where Turdz is winning, and advances to the semifinals, where we have Turdz versus Laguna Loire and Tifa Lockhart versus Hiri Hyuga. And I think this is a sweet rule set, which makes up for how dull the last rule set was. It's level 10, no rares, no same numbers, meaning if you have one A964 type card in the hand, you can't have another A964, so no Squall Cipher, right? If you have Fafnir, A955 type card, you can't have Zidane, 55A9, right? Because they're both A955, but you could have like an A964, an A963, an A962, right? You can have cards that have three of the same number, but you can't have any two cards that have the same set of four numbers. And I thought this was an interesting rule set for hand building because it means you don't have that kind of easy, natural pairing of cards. You know, as we saw last round, all these cards with A862s play off each other really well, or at least can. And these opposites work well against each other. They set up all these same walls. And here, you're never going to quite have that perfect synergy. And I think that forces kind of more interesting hand building. So I'm pretty hyped about this rule set. I think if when I run more of these tournaments, I will bring back, similar rule sets where, maybe it'll not be on level 10, but I think this is a good rule set. So, as always, Turdz' hand is on the right, his opponent's on the left. This is Triad Wars 1, the semifinals, game 1. Laguna will go first. I didn't take too long to think about my hand for this game. I jumped straight in with one that had worked well for me in the past. At a first glance, it may look a bit weird with the three pairs of sideways numbers, but the 18A8, Nooj, 6878, that's Freya, and 6959, Pain, play off each other well in many scenarios, as do the 8935, 5599, and 6959. It also gives a few starter options, usually Nooj, 18A8, and 3 or 2, or Braska, A935, and 7, but others can work as well. That being said, I thought they had quite a strong hand, with double numbers in all directions, which could serve them well. That's a lie. They don't have double numbers down left, but with double numbers in many directions. Given the hands, I expected this starter, as I had no direct captures against it. My hand does have a ready-made solution of 5599 and 5, which would set up Braska to have a same in 4, and Pain to have a same in 2. However, I opted against it here, given it potentially gave their 7868 a lot of power at the end of the game, and I figured I'd struggle to force them to play it earlier, especially as it also matched up well to my 6878. By playing this in 7, I saw they had no capture in 4, and there was still potential later in the game for me to get a same in 2 if the game played out well. As in some previous games, with this move, I really wanted to make them have to think about where would be a strong place to play next. Depending on what they did, I still had options to set myself up in 5 later if it was right, so I was fine with having no direct capture for 1 from 7 myself at this stage. Yeah. So these adjacent corner moves are always complicated and interesting, but right now there is no way for Turdz to take the card in 1. So to me, the natural moves are to go in 2 or 4 and start building out safety. And I think 2's pretty interesting here, especially because Turdz can't put particularly high out-facing cards in 4, right? And I think 2 actually was a really good option for Red, because if blue doesn't go in 4, red can really start building out there. If blue does go in 4, unless they play Nooj there, which red will be able to take, then red also has the same wall in 8, which will flip anything in 4. So any move in 2 probably is going to be met by something in 3, but anything there can be captured. So I think 2 was a really dangerous option that isn't where the game's going to go. Another natural option is 4. Of course, there are moves, always in 3, 6, and 9. Occasionally, there's big combo setups in 5. But here, if I'm red, I'm looking at 2 or 4. I'm specifically seeing, okay, you can't take my card. I'm going to just start making sure it's locked in. But even a weird move like... maybe that's a bad idea. All right, let's move on. We'll pretend I wasn't going to say what I was going to say because I don't think it was very smart. It wasn't essential for them to fill the gap here, but given they had no capture in 4, it made some degree of sense. Yeah, because red can only capture blue's card in 7 from 8, not from 4. So just 4 is not going to be a useful card square for them on that front. So starting to build out from their starter in 1, I think, makes a lot of sense. It also made sure they didn't set me up for anything myself. It wasn't a perfect defense, and I quickly looked at 5, 5, 9, 9, and 5 at this stage too. I think it ultimately led to ties, but it's quite a difficult position to calculate, as it can lead to a lot of combos, and is generally a more risky move. 8 felt like the most logical spot to me. It locks in 7, and actually I had some good cards to deal with their move in 4, and also all of my remaining cards could play off anything they were to put in 5. If they didn't go in 5 themselves after, I could still put 5, 5, 9, 9 in there. So yeah, 5, 5, 9, 9, and 5 is pretty fascinating, right? Because Pain is set up with the same in 2 and a plus wall in 8. And that's really promising, when you have one card that combos well from both squares. But it's also so vulnerable in all directions. It gives Shuyan 9, 2, 8, 9, a same in 8. It gives Zidane a plus wall in 2. And it just feels very dangerous to play. And I agree with Turdz. I believe here, I think it does lead to a tie. But it's like one of those moves that's very scary to make, because it sets up so much combo potential for both you and your opponent, and you're on second turn, where combo potential is always something to be a little more careful about, because you won't get that last turn to play in one of those squares. So I think that's a scary move to make, and it makes sense to look at 8. And then when you look at 8, it's interesting which card to play there, because you really want to have a threat in 5, right? But you also need to control it, because if you go in 8, red has the first option to go in 5. How can you control what they put in 5? And so say you looked at Freya in 8. Well, they can't take Freya with Zidane in 5, because then you have the same with Pain in 2, but they can take Freya with Cyan in 5. And that looks pretty scary, That just looks like high outfacing values, fairly safe, pretty strong card. And then if you look at something like Pain in 8, now here they can't play Cyan in 5, because that sets Freya up for 2, but suddenly because we've used Pain, they have Zidane that can go in 5. And then there's something like Nooj in 8. And Nooj in 8, you've kept control now of both cards they'd want to play in 5, but suddenly you don't really have a threat in 5 yourself, because the other two cards with their 6 up set up Nooj to go in 5. If we play Nooj in 8, we don't set up this itself to go in 5, and so the only card we have that can go in 5 is Ayla, 5599, and that can be plus walled from 2, and probably can't be, ruled back. So this is one of those positions where going in 5 immediately is really scary, and going in 8 is really tempting, but it's not obvious what card to put there. Every card there has kind of a strength and a drawback. The cards that set up a combo in 5 also don't keep control over 5, and the opponent will have the opportunity to block it. A card that doesn't set up something good for 5 also won't threaten 5, and the opponent has the option to, for instance, make a, I think, very dangerous move in 9. For instance, if Nooj in 8 won 8, A8, then maybe Cyan in 9 would be really strong. A8, A8, 8, because it keeps control of stuff. I guess, it keeps control of stuff that Turdz would want to put in 5. For instance, Ayla is comboed back in 2, while Pain in 5 is samed by Zidane in 6. So, just one of those tricky positions where the L is hard to make work, and you really just have to calculate them all out. There's not like a rule of thumb as this is the one that's going to work, but understanding it as I want to have a threat in 5, and I need to control their ability to play in 5. If we look at it from that lens, you can see why it's difficult here to find the right L. And the move in 5 is another option, but just very scary to play. I forgot myself for a minute there. In the last round, I noted that I find some of the more difficult positions to calculate are ones where they rely on remembering whether or not certain cards have had to be used earlier in the process, and so can't be used twice. Here I set myself up nicely in 5 and 9, but forgot all about my plan for 2 for a split second, and that was enough to end up with this. Looking at it again, I think 1-8, A8, and 8 was a much better move, which I think would at least give me a tie and quite a few paths to a potential win. I regretted this move almost instantly after making it, and just hoped they wouldn't notice. Damn, nice win. By keeping the 2 other cards strong up and down, I couldn't do anything from here. So each card Turdz would play in 8 kind of concedes a different option in 5 or 9. And of course, when Pain is played, Pain no longer has pluses in 2 against a 5 facing up. so it doesn't have the natural move here. And if we look at kind of the obvious continuations, Freya in 9 ties the game up 5-5, but then Cyan in 6, A8, 8-2, can recapture, making it 6-4, and Chuyen's going to capture one thing at the end to give the win to red. And if we look at kind of setup moves in 3, for a second when looking at this, I thought Ayla in 3 might be a tie. With the idea being that if they go in 2, they can't capture my card in 3. I can play something in 6, say Nooj, that captures the card in 5 and ties it up, making it 5-5. So I can meet any move in 2 and 6, and that's going to be enough to get a tie. But, of course, red can just play... I think red should play Cyan in 9 there. Yeah, that looks like the win. Because Chuyen will always be able to recapture Zidane, and the cards in 1 and 9 cannot be taken. So that's going to be enough to win. So I thought for a second Turdz might have a way out here, but he doesn't. And he finally falls in the semifinals. So he says, up until this point, I didn't really feel like it made any mistakes or bad moves. I agree. I think Turdz played really flawlessly till now, and you might say, here's a move I think applies more pressure, but basically every time he had a winning position, he converted. Whenever he had a difficult position, he found straightforward paths to a tie. I think just throughout this, and we played some practice games against AI on randoms, and he hadn't lost any of those either. I think he played a really nice run of undefeated games, and of games where he just wasn't making mistakes, and I think hopefully people learned a bit from his play, because I think it's really, really high-level play. Here I definitely didn't make a good second move. Maybe Waz telling me after the game he'd already placed 5-5, 9-9, and 5 on my first move before I told him what I was doing should also be a hint that I maybe made 2 mistakes here. To go so long without making an error and throwing it away like this sucks, but you'd expect a semi-final opponent to punish you. Yeah, I think Turdz made mistakes here both in 7 and 8, and we can see the reasoning or the challenge behind those moves, like the reason this would be a tough situation. I do think Red's hand was significantly better and put Turdz under pressure immediately. I think Red's hand was very good, actually. I did a bunch of play testing between hands to make sure he had a tough semifinal opponent hand. And while it might look like just a bunch of power cards slung together, I tried out a bunch of different hands with power cards slung together, and this one seemed, to my eyes, the most functional. I thought this was a very strong hand he was facing. To go so long without And so then Turdz has a bunch of wrap-up thoughts, and let's go through them. But first, let's see. Here's the final bracket, so you can see the whole thing. You can see Turdz in the top left corner, defeating Luca, defeating Bugenhagen, Karen, Jenna, and then falling to Laguna in the semi-finals, who ends up losing in the finals. And you can see all these different RPG characters from games I've mostly played, though not always. And yeah, there's the bracket. I think that's the last slide, so I'll just start reading Turd's thought while you can look at the bracket and explore. Chrono should have beat Rufus Shinra. He's a better character. Well, I decided Rufus was more of a conniving triple triad playing type than Chrono. And Chrono's a silent protagonist, so how good a character is he really? I know people love their silent protagonists. I like Chrono a lot, but let's not pretend they're great characters, people. Anyway, and so you can, anyways, feel free to look at the bracket and complain that, Shina Fujibayashi shouldn't have beaten Vivi. Vivi's the best. Vivi is the best. And so feel free to complain about which AIs I made good and which AIs I made not so good, but do not complain about Yuri Hugo winning. Shadow Hearts 2 is the best. Overall wrap-up thoughts. Firstly, it's been nice to play out some triple triad games again, with it being around 18 months since TTA went down. I expected to be quite rusty, but I actually thought up until that last game I was playing some good stuff. Many of the games didn't follow the traditional formations, and I like to think I could be good at both styles, following the standard patterns when sensible to do so, but also pulling out some weird and wonderful moves that the opponent wouldn't expect. Sometimes that would be to put the opponent off their stride and try to seize advantage, other times it would be reactive to avoid a sticky situation. Hopefully as I walked through these games it was apparent which was which in this case. Probably the closest games to following the common formations were my wins in round 2, albeit the adjacent corner play was very different to the usually recommended style, and my loss at the end. Generally, there used to be some talk of triple triad versus other games, with closed being described as more like poker, while open being more akin to chess. While I might be taking that a bit literally here, as someone who's far from a chess expert, I'd expect a number of games played between two evenly matched, highly skilled players to result in more white wins than black. We discussed this a bit, and it turns out most games would actually be tied, but white has an overall advantage, albeit much smaller than I thought it would be, over black in terms of number of games won. The reason I bring this up is because my logical thinking was that on first turn, the aim should be to win, whereas on second turn, I feel like it should be not to lose. Applying that back to triple triad, it feels like first turn should have an overall advantage, being able to lead the play towards a win and taking a tie if not, whereas second turn should aim to at least tie and try to force a win, a subtle difference. Why do I mention this? As I looked back at this tournament, I realized that all of my wins were on second turn. It's probably too small a sample size to draw any meaningful conclusions, but that suggests my play is perhaps more reactive than I thought. I thought this was a fascinating thing to notice. So Turdz played 10 games throughout the tournament, 1 in the first round, 2 in the second, 3 in the third and the fourth, and then 1 in the fifth, for 10 games total. And he played 4 of them on first turn, and all of those were ties. And he played 6 of them on second turn, and he only tied 1 of them, and he won 4 and drew 1. And you might think, how come he had more second turns than first turns? But this is easily explained mathematically, right? If you always have a decisive game on second turn and always tie on first turn, then say every match you switch off between first and second turn. The first round, you get first turn, you tie. Second turn, you win. You move on. You've had an even number. But if you start with a second turn game, you win that and you move on, and now you've had more second turns than first turns. So if someone has a lot more decisive results on second turn than first turn, over time, they will end up playing more second turn games than first turn games, and vice versa. But I thought this was really interesting, and I'd love it if someone had thoughts on what about Turdz's style here made his games, or his hand building maybe, or something, made him so much more likely to win on second turn than first turn. Because first turn, we had a 100% tie rate, and on second turn, he tied 1 out of 6 games. He played 2 more games on second turn, and had 3 fewer ties, and had 5 more decisive games. 83% decisive versus 0. And so even in a small sample, that's pretty striking, and I thought just really interesting thing to notice, and I wish I had some deep conclusions about his style of play, but I don't think I do. Finally, I think these AIs do have some potential to be very good, if it was possible to insert some sort of variation into their play so that they aren't easy to figure out. One built to a high logical level that can calculate out moves based on both hands would be difficult for a human opponent to beat, as they could potentially play at an optimal level. So I will say, of course, you could build an AI that can just calculate triple triad out from scratch and will play perfectly, and that's fine. That is not what I was interested in doing here. I wanted to build AIs that were somewhat similar to human play, but were built based on maximizing certain values and trying to build what was competitive opponents from there. But he's right. I would love to add some variation to what they do. So I think in the future I may try to build ones that, instead of having a path that necessarily will always lead to one move in the exact same position, will lead to maybe you could play either of these 2 moves and there will be some randomized element, because I think that will make them harder to exploit over time if someone figures them out. But I also think they're pretty good. I think they played at a pretty good level. Even Bugenhagen in the second round, I think, was a wholly respectable opponent, and Turdz is just better at triple triad. But Turdz is very, very good at triple triad. And so I think it made for interesting games. We had lots of different formations. We had one game with, I think, the least common position possible after 3 moves, when there were cards played in 6, 2, and 7. And so there's a whole lot of variety, I think, already on offer, even with the AIs not built in a way where they can make different moves in the exact same position. So the last thing he says is, the one other thing I wanted to note about the AIs is that sometimes, by following a strict pathway, the moves are logical to them, but may look weird to the human observer. There were 2 moves in particular that caught me by surprise. The 4th move in the first round 2 game, in 7, with cards in 5, 9, and 2, and the 3rd move in the second round 3 game, in 4, with cards in 5 and 7. Both are moves that I won't say I never looked at, but under a strict time limit may not have had time to consider, as I'd have preferred to look at the moves I felt were more logical in those positions. If these AIs had existed when TTA was popular and people had played them often and these moves came out regularly, it may have even led to some slightly different playstyles coming out where these sorts of moves may have been more popular or common. It may be the reason the AI makes these moves is not the same reason you or I would, but they were effective in their respective situations regardless. And yeah, both the games he identifies, the AI found a pretty clear path to a tie in a somewhat tricky-looking position. And I think humans develop styles over time, and if you look at when computer programs developed in chess, they had very different styles than humans did, and humans have ended up adapting towards what computers have shown are kind of alternate methods of playing. And I think it would be curious if that had been the same case here. And I guess I just don't know. But I want to end by saying thank you so much to Turdz for doing this. I would love to run more tournaments like this. If anyone wants to, sign up and play these, I had a whole lot of fun just watching games. I think watching well-played triple triad is a joy, and it's fun to get to comment on. And so thanks so much to Turdz. Thanks to everyone who watched these and followed his journey through this tournament. If any of you would like to play any tournaments like this, please let me know. I think semifinals is a really good run. I think very tough opponent in the semifinals. Turdz has said, and I hope he still feels this way, that he'd love to get another shot. I will probably cheat and fix the bracket to make sure he faces Laguna again so he can have a revenge match. Or at least if he gets far enough, has the chance to face Laguna, because I'm a cheater. And that's the tournament. Cheers.